I'm Leah Lane, an award-winning travel writer and author of Places I Remember, Tales, Truths, Delights from 100 Countries. On this podcast, we share conversations with travelers about fascinating destinations and memorable experiences around the world. Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, is set in the middle of the United States between Maryland and Virginia on the banks of the Potomac River. It's the seat of power of a most powerful country and one of the most beautiful cities in the United States, certainly the most grand. It was designed to be that way. Here are a few fun facts. The city was named for George Washington, who chose the location. The District of Columbia, 68 square miles, was named for Columbia, the personified goddess of the United States. George Washington, first president of the United States, never got to live there. John and Abigail Adams became the first occupants of the presidential mansion in 1800. After capturing the nation's capital during the War of 1812, British troops set fire to the White House, U.S. Capitol, several federal buildings, and private residences in 1814. First Lady Dolly Madison, who refused to leave the White House until only a few hours before the British arrived, secured the full-length portrait of George Washington and a copy of the Declaration of Independence on her way out. The 600,000 or so citizens of the capital of the United States who are deprived of voting representation in the national legislature have been seeking statehood for years. Today, D.C. welcomes school children on class trips and travelers from around the world. I lived in D.C. for several years in the 1990s, and my guests today all live in Washington, D.C. now. Liz George currently leads the communication strategy for the Nature Conservancy's climate policy work in the United States. Joan Haskins is a writer and a children's yoga teacher in the D.C. public schools, but she insists that her best and favorite gig was raising her daughter, Julia, who also joins us and who is a writer, editor, and communications professional. Welcome, D.C. ladies. We'll talk about many aspects of Washington, D.C., but I asked each of you to share your 5 favorite things about your city. Liz, why don't you start?
Thanks, Leah, and thanks for having me. This is really exciting, and DC is my city, and I love it. I'd say the first and foremost thing, because I'm an art lover, is loads of world-class museums, the Smithsonian, of course, being the biggest and entirely free. But there's a lot of other smaller museums sort of off the beaten path that if you come to DC, you really need to go see. The Hillwood Museum, the Phillips Collection, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and the Krieger Museum are all examples of places that people should definitely check out in addition to the Smithsonian in terms of art in the nation's capital.
I remember when I lived there, I would visit the Phillips Collection and visit my favorite painting, Renoir's Luncheon of the Boating Party. That's a very famous painting. And I could go as many times as I wanted, and I absolutely love doing that. I also love the Vermeers at the National Gallery. There are 2 of them, the girl with the red hat and the girl with the flute. They were like my friends. So I agree with you. It's a wonderful city for museums.
Absolutely. And then there's the fact that DC is such a vibrant and diverse community. Aside from the fact that it has been historically a predominantly Black city, it also has, because it's the nation's capital, embassies from all over the world. And there are these incredible neighborhoods like Shaw and Anacostia, events like the Funk Parade, and resources like the Go-Go Museum.
I have to ask you, what's the Funk Parade?
The Funk Parade is this great thing that happens in May, and it is this explosion of music and culture. And the Funk Parade celebrates Black music and Black creativity, and especially funk and go-go. Go-go being the official music of DC. We're super proud of it. To me, go-go is the answer to when you're feeling down.
Is that like go-go dancer go-go?
Go-go, yeah, go-go is a specific type of funk music that originated in DC. Then there's an online resource, soon to be a physical resource, called the Go-Go Museum. Everybody should check it out. I'd say number 3 on my list would be kayaking, actually. People don't realize that there are in and around DC, the waterways are great for flat water kayaking. And you can, as a visitor, rent kayaks at the Keybridge Boathouse and actually kayak on the Potomac and kayak around and see the city from the water, which is absolutely wonderful. Number 4 would be the Kennedy Center. The Kennedy Center is my happy place.
Everybody's happy place.
It's, I am regular at the ballet and the symphony and the opera, but one of the things that people don't realize is there's a lot of free stuff at the Kennedy Center. The Millennium Stage at the Kennedy Center literally has free performances every single day. And they've just opened up a new facility called the Reach Center, which also has free performances and community celebrations. And so definitely need to check out what's happening at the Kennedy Center. And then the last one is just outside of DC. It is my favorite presidential monument, and that is Roosevelt Island. And it's a place that even people who live here don't know about. And basically, Roosevelt Island is this little teeny weeny island, and it sits right off of between Virginia and DC. And you can access it from the Virginia side. There's a really small parking lot and a footbridge, and it's open from dawn till dusk. And it has this great sort of 1.5-mile footpath trail that's really wonderful. And then at the end of it is a monument to Theodore Roosevelt. Most people don't go there very often, but it's, on a nice day, it's a really great place to go take a walk outside. And the monument itself it's very inspiring because it has some of Teddy Roosevelt's best quotes about leadership and about environmental protection and about youth and leadership. And it's a really cool sort of place to just sit and be with nature. That to me, especially given what I do, is very important. So
Great. A very good
my
tip.
top 5.
Yeah, that's a great top 5. And by the way, there's another Roosevelt Island you probably know in New York, which is a historic monument to FDR. So there are 2 Roosevelt Islands in our country. Thank you very much. Those were interesting. How about some from Julia? What are your favorite things?
Sure. So, Leah, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. This is so cool. As a born and bred Washingtonian, there are a lot of things to choose from, but so as not to overlap with Liz, who knows everything about DC, it seems, I'm feeling a little bit inadequate.
No, you know your 5 favorites. There's a lot to love in DC. So
there is a lot to love. And I'll start with an old-time favorite, Rock Creek Park. It is an amazing park. It's actually bigger than Central Park in New York City, which a lot of people don't realize, but there's a ton of stuff to do. And I'm not an outdoorsy person myself, really, but it's not like intense hiking. I just love walking, just chilling. As a teenager, I used to ride horses throughout Rock Creek Park. That was a beautiful experience and something that I would love to do again. But it was great to have that wide open space, those trails right in the middle of the city. And it's a really fantastic resource.
Yes, I would add another lovely, I think it connects the Canal Towpath. Does that connect to Rock Creek Park? I know it's in the edge of Rock Creek Park Way, and that's where you can walk part of a path that runs for 185 miles along the C&O Canal, and you can walk, run, or bike along there. So that's another beautiful outside place that I would also recommend.
A lot of outdoor space that people don't realize in DC. Think of a city, but actually there is a lot to do if you are somebody who doesn't want to be cooped up. Walk around and be healthy. So that was really great. And another thing, I think I've taken for granted just how important Washington, D.C. is as a city. You have all this activism and all this proximity to power, and yet it's also a place where real people live. When people talk about D.C., they talk about it as this negative, evil entity. Oh, those fat cats in DC, what are they doing now? It's like, well, okay, maybe you don't like president, maybe you don't like Congress, but there are other things going on, and there are people who are actively working to make change. So
I think it's an amazing thing to remember all of the meetings that have been held there throughout the years, all the great speeches that were made and the important things that were done through these protests and activism in DC. It's the center of that. So it's a good point.
Absolutely. And even more recent times, the Women's March, the biggest one was in DC. Even as a kid, my mom took me to the Million Mom March against gun violence. So there's a long, incredible history of activism, but also being able to go to Capitol Hill and be at that seat of power. It's really cool. Another thing that I love about DC is just the range of city-specific foods. So we have a huge Ethiopian population in DC, which is not only great for diversity, but just the amazing foods that they bring. My favorite is probably Zennebeck restaurant in Adams Morgan. Although you really can't go wrong. Swing a dead cat and you'll find some of the best Ethiopian food anywhere in DC.
It's so good. And you don't find it that many other places. I've lived all over and I can't find many Ethiopian restaurants, but you can find a whole bunch just in Adams Morgan and they're all good.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a ton of places you can choose from. Then, of course, there's Half Smokes at Ben's Chili Bowl. Half Smokes are pretty unique to DC. It's not a hot dog, it's better. You also have late night jumbo slices. I say late night because I've never heard of anyone eating a jumbo slice, a very large slice of pizza, like sober and during the daytime. That's really like an 8th Street corridor, U Street type of experience. Very fun, something I don't engage in anymore, really. But
well, why not?
I'm
You're young.
young enough. Still, like that's something I can't handle anymore. The jumbo slice at 1 a.m. But kudos to the youngins out there on the streets. And then we have Mambo or Mambo Sauce, depending on your persuasion. It is sort of ketchup-y. It's a little sweet. It is typically used over foods like that you get at a carryout in DC, like Chinese food or hard fried chicken wings. And what I have in common with Mayor Muriel Bowser is that I do not like Mambo Sauce, but it's not something that I freely admit. She got a lot of flack for saying that it was annoying. And that was, I would never go that far. It's just a little bit too sweet for me.
But thank you for sharing. You're honest. I like that.
Yeah. Another great thing about DC is the robust public transportation system, the metro. It's comparatively clean and comfortable. I've gone to other cities and I've yet to find something quite like it. You can go to Maryland, Virginia. My line is the red line typically. And what I love about it is it's also just incredibly accessible. I've been to New York. I used to live there. And, I'm sure I'll get hate for this too. I don't think it compares to DC, especially in terms of the accessibility. You have elevators, you have wide spaces.
It's cleaner too.
So much cleaner. Like people will glare at you if you eat on the metro. So that has really kept it clean over the years. But it's the heartbeat of the city, really. And something I remember as a teenager was, at least for the DC public schools, I'm a product of the system proudly. And if you were going to your prom or your homecoming, they made it so that the sites would be off metro stations. So you would have kids dressed to the finest and riding the metro and carrying their water bottles of not water on the metro. And it's just sort of a rite of passage. And you still see people dressed up gorgeously going to the Kennedy Center and all these other places in DC.
So it's a usable, useful, beautiful metro system. That's a great plus.
It's for everyone and everything. And another personal aspect of DC to me is the National Press Club. So I joined when I moved back to DC in, I think, 2014, 2015. The National Press Club is the home of communicators and journalists in the DC area. There are sister clubs throughout the US, but this is the big one. Everyone has come to speak at the National Press Club at some point. Ambassadors, celebrities, musicians, it really runs the gamut. But it is a hub for journalists and communicators to come together, get a drink after work.
Is it accessible to the public?
It is accessible to the public. You need to be a guest, but that's also what I love about it, that you can just come in. It's not some big secret society and there's no dress code except for special events. So I can come in jeans and a t-shirt and mingle with some of the, finest editors and reporters in the DC area. One thing that's really special to me is that Dr. King spoke there in 1962. And he was, I believe, the first Black speaker to attend as a speaker for the luncheon. So it's really personal, just all the history that has unfolded there. And of course, on Friday nights, there is a taco night. So if you are just there for the tacos, I also don't blame you.
Yeah. With no Mambo sauce?
I don't think that they've brought that on the menu yet, but I can speak to the chef.
You can see, find out. Yeah. I'll add it later. Thank you. Those were very interesting, very varied. Joan, how about your favorites?
Okay. And Leah, thank you so much for including me. Here are my 5 that I decided on. My first favorite is the National Cathedral. It is in my neighborhood, luckily, or I'm in its neighborhood. It is the most stunning structure. It's got gorgeous gardens. It's a place where I go a few times a week. There's so much history. It was built in 1907, and so many famous people have spoken there. So many famous people have had funerals there. It's an amazing place. But what I love about it is that it's so accessible to just everyone. It is a place of such acceptance and inclusiveness. I've had many joyous times there. I was part of a yoga class where they opened up the nave of the cathedral, and it was a yoga class for hundreds of people. It was just, the bell is very important in the cathedral to commemorate a joyous and not joyous. I think a lot of people don't know that the National Cathedral has Helen Keller buried there, and also Anne Sullivan, her teacher. They opened for an exhibit. It's called The Doves, which was a beautiful exhibit that has been really all over the world. And we were lucky enough to have it at the cathedral last month. Moving along, I'm choosing Massachusetts Avenue as one of my favorite places. The entire avenue, also known as Embassy Row. It's a wonderful street that obviously includes all the embassies and the vice president's residence, which I'm very excited about now. The Islamic Center, all the embassies, most of the embassies are there with the flags, which makes it an incredibly beautiful walk. I walk all the way down from my house to DuPont Circle. And
it's the place you take people. When you live there, you're very happy to take a look. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful avenue.
Walking down, there are statues and sculptures all the way down, including Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela. There's a sculpture of Khalil Gibran, Gandhi, and the newest one is in front of the Embassy of Indonesia. It's Saraswati, who is the Hindu goddess of learning and wisdom. And that is the newest sculpture, which is right at the border of DuPont Circle. And I'm going to move on to Georgetown, which is a part of the city that is home to Georgetown University and many diplomats. It's a place where if you're a tourist, you tend to go to Georgetown. I really like Georgetown, but there are 2 places in Georgetown that are pretty cool that many people don't know about. First of all, there's Julia Child's house on Olive Street, which...
That's appropriate, Olive Street.
Isn't it? I was just thrilled to find out that she lived there. And it's being renovated now. It's a darling little house. The other one, not so darling, the Exorcist stairs from the movie The Exorcist. The many movies are filmed in Georgetown. When The Exorcist was filmed, they used these stairs that are the most daunting staircase I've ever seen. And if you saw the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And to this day, I've never ventured on those stairs. The next place I would choose as one of my favorites is the Arboretum. It's a major center for botanical research, and it's 446 acres right in the middle of the city, and it houses also the National Bonsai Museum. But my favorite part of the Arboretum are the National Capitol columns, which are 22 Corinthian columns that were actually part of the Capitol originally when it was built. They decided not to use them. They weren't holding the structure up the way they wanted them to. And now they're in the middle of this field, which is an amazing sight to just go into the Arboretum. And there in the middle of the field are these huge Corinthian columns.
It looks like Athens, like you're in the middle of Greece. It's really stunning.
It does. It's stunning. It's a beautiful place. And I feel like that is a hidden gem. I don't think enough people go there, which...
That's why it's so beautiful. In part, it's not too crowded. So many places are overcrowded, but more people should go there. It's beautiful.
Yes.
And your last favorite?
My last one is the Vietnam Memorial. And I'm choosing this one because it was the first memorial I had been to. Someone took me there when I first moved here. There are over 58,000 names etched into the wall. And to me, it's the most somber and the most stunning memorial in DC. And DC is full of memorials. It's also the quietest. I've never been there when anyone has been talking. It's just the kind of place where it just demands silence. People do rubbings of the names. Yeah, it's one of those places that if I were a tourist or if I were coming to visit DC, I would not miss the Vietnam Memorial. It's really special architecturally and just the whole feeling with it. So those are my 5 places.
They're wonderful. Thank you very much. I have a few I'm just going to mention in passing because I lived there, as I said, in the 1990s. I loved cherry blossom time around the tidal basin, but I remember you could find cherry blossoms outside of there. And I think for tourists, I don't know how the crowds are now, but I remember Stanton Park, Oxen Run Park, Montrose Park, and there are some streets that are just filled with these. And I don't know, again, it might be crowded, but when I was there, it wasn't. And it was such a treat to see those outside of the crowds of the tidal basin. You should see that as well, but that's a wonderful time of year to visit. And there are other places, so check it out. Also, the Declaration of Independence, the original one, is in the National Archives Museum. It's a wonderful thing to see. It's the permanent home of that and of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It really is very stirring to me. And just the area around DC, you have Alexandria, Virginia, which is now a suburb, but it's a lovely old 18th and 19th century center there. You have Fredericksburg, which has a 40-block historic area and many battlefields around there. You have the Chesapeake Bay area, little towns like St. Michael's and Annapolis is there. There are so many areas you can visit outside of the city for a day trip, and it's a wonderful area. It's beautiful, it's hilly, or you've got the bay, so I recommend that. Let me ask you, the mall. The mall is sort of the center. It's big. It takes about 45 minutes to walk the length of it. And anybody have any comments about all the buildings on either side of it and the fact that it's the center of the city? Yeah, Liz.
The mall to me is a wonder because it is flanked by all of these world-class museums that in any other city or in any other country, you'd pay a $10 entry fee and you can go into almost each and every one of them for free. And there's just nothing like it. You've got the Hirshhorn. The Hirshhorn is one of my favorite places, which is a contemporary art museum. And the Hirshhorn lately in the last 10 years has been doing a lot to interact with contemporary artists here in DC, which has been really terrific to see.
The Smithsonian, the original Smithsonian.
The original Smithsonian building
is
really cool. And the gardens back there. In fact, I've been there with Joan. She and I spent some time in those gardens. That's another thing. And there's always events that take place on the mall itself. The Folklife Festival that comes in July every year, which is a phenomenal presentation of culture from all over the country. As someone who lives here, you have sort of a love-hate relationship because on the one hand, the mall is full of tourists.
Right. That's always true, right? If it's
on
good,
the other hand, and they don't know the rules. They don't know that you stand right, you walk left. They don't know any of that.
Well, they're from all over the world, so it might be different where they're from.
But it's hard, and you have a love-hate relationship with the mall, but at the same time, there's just so much there.
Yeah, you've got the Lincoln Memorial on the west side, you've got the Capitol on the east side, you've got the Washington Monument, and if you have one day, I would say if you go to the mall and kind of use that as your center, you can see a lot of the classic Washington. Have any of you been on a tour of the White House or Capitol? And I'm not expecting that you have, because residents very often don't do these things. It's like going to the Statue of Liberty when you live in New York. Has anyone done that?
I've not done the tour, but because of what I do for a living, I've been to the Capitol Visitor Center a few times because that tends to be a gathering place when you do events that involve Congress. And definitely the Capitol Visitor Center is a really, really cool place to be. It's an interesting, to see how the seat of government works is really important. And so, the Capitol Visitor Center is definitely worth a stop.
Also, I would recommend the interiors of buildings. You can Google, but there are some of the most beautiful interiors in all of the United States and world class, and sometimes in the least expected buildings. So you have to maybe check it out, but just to pop in and admire the architecture, it's just wonderful. I think that's
the Library of Congress is good for that. The Library of Congress is astonishing.
Yeah. Just to pop in, you don't have to spend a long time, but it's a very, I don't know if you can Instagram, if it's Instagrammable or not, but I used to just go and look at it. I didn't take photos, but today everybody wants that. And you've got great interiors. Okay, well, the name of the podcast is Places I Remember. I'd love to hear a favorite memory of Washington, D.C. from each of you. So, Liz, why don't you start?
Oh boy.
One.
I know, that's my problem. I got to pick one. I think I'm going to go with probably the most DC thing that's ever happened to me. So I used to live in Georgetown, and I used to have to commute to work. And because Georgetown is sort of not very well served by Metro, and because I used to work a job that was really late, I would drive to work. Bill Clinton was in the White House, and Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State. The hairdresser that Madeleine Albright used to go see was literally right next door to where my parking garage opened onto the street in Georgetown. And the reason that I knew this was because every time Madeleine Albright had a press appearance, I had to wait to come out of my parking garage because the Secret Service was there. And the garage door would come up, and there would be the guys with the earpieces and the little wires coming out of their ears, and the big giant, Chevy Suburban death wagons with the blacked out windows. They would be blocking the entrance. So I would have to wait for them to notice me. I would have to wait for them to sort of be like, okay, obviously she's not doing anything, so we should let her go. And this would happen invariably whenever Madeleine Albright had a press appearance that day. And so I always knew when Madeleine Albright was going to be on TV, because I would have my commute interrupted by the Secret Service as I was trying to go to work. And that's just a very DC thing. When you live in this town, you become used to the idea that at any given moment, if somebody who is super important is around, there's going to be Secret Service presence, and that's going to require that you sort of shift what you're doing a little bit. And there's no ill will, there's no resentment. It's just sort of a fact of life that this is going to happen to you. So I used to be the only woman in America who would have her commute disrupted because the Secretary of State needed her hair done.
Very good. Joan, how about you?
Well, my favorite memory is a little bit of a sentimental one, because it has to be when I was dating my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, over 30 years ago. I was fairly new to the city, and my husband had grown up here. We were fairly young and pretty poor, but we explored the whole city. As we said, the Smithsonian museums are all free. We took advantage of that. We didn't have a car. We walked everywhere, took an occasional cab. We ate in restaurants in neighborhoods that I had never been to. So it was kind of cool that he was my introduction to DC. And there was something very special about, falling in love and exploring the city that would eventually become my forever home. I didn't know that at the time, but here I am.
Here you are. And look, Julia, do you know this story? I'm sure you know the details of it, but it kind of is a nice way to introduce you, because that came out of that love story. So what about your favorite memory, Julia?
Yeah, and they had a lot more fun before I was born, but
well, they have fun with you too.
Yeah, no, growing up here is a really special privilege. It's not something that I really appreciated growing up. I just sort of assumed that everybody grew up and went to schools with a diverse range of people, races, ethnicities, religions. I really did take that for granted. So when I came back to DC after being burned out in New York, all my dreams were dashed of becoming a New York City big time magazine writer. I felt a little bit dejected, but I really started to see the city in a whole new light. I appreciated it for what it was. I remember just walking around downtown after my internships and thinking, okay, this is pretty cool. Like, how many people get to go to the portrait gallery on their lunch break? How many people can walk around the National Mall and listen to jazz in the park at the National Gallery of Art and grab some sangria after work? Like, it's a beautiful, vibrant city. And I'm really happy that I got to see it for what it is as an adult. And I have my family and friends here, and it feels like my home that I don't take for granted anymore.
That's beautiful. Well, in a way, it's all of our home. It's our capital, our country's capital. And I hope people will hear these interesting things and visit again and bring your family. We need to understand the history of the United States capital city and enjoy its pleasures. Well, I thank you very much, my smart and special DC friends. You've given us a wonderful taste of the monumental charms of our nation's capital. Thank you, Liz, Joan, and Julia, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Thanks for listening to our award-winning podcast. We've recorded over 100 episodes of Places I Remember, so follow us on any podcast app. And new monthly episodes are also on YouTube with gorgeous video. My book, Places I Remember, is available in print and Kindle, and I read the audio version. Follow my travel writing at Forbes.com. Contact me at the links in the show notes or on my website, placesirememberlealane.com, and keep making your own travel memories.